Okay, hey YouTube. In the news over the past week or so, there have been two big legal cases kind of getting some headlines dealing with the transgender community. The first case deals with transgender bathrooms, particularly the White House's guidelines around allowing trans people, particularly trans students rather, to access the bathroom that matches their gender identity. And the other case is regarding whether or not religious organizations have the ability to opt out of providing healthcare services to transgender patients. Both of these cases are going to be heard in Texas in a district court first, and it's going to be the same judge. And this judge is a conservative judge who's actually, in the first case regarding bathroom use, clearly making a little bit of a power grab. Because for those of you who haven't been paying attention, the Fourth Circuit, which is a higher federal court than a district court, ruled in favor of a trans student, saying that the trans student Gavin Grimm gets to use the bathroom that matches his gender identity. Yet this district judge here in Texas has issued a nationwide injunction against Obama's guidelines, suggesting that he is somehow going to be able to overrule a higher court, which is not how the court system works at all. So whether or not he can actually issue a nationwide injunction is sort of a legal question. Whether or not you can actually issue an injunction against agency guidelines when that's kind of part of the agency's scope is a separate question, as is the question itself of, do trans people have the right to use the bathroom that matches their gender identity? And I think this is something that's going to ultimately end up in the Supreme Court, probably not with this particular case, because I have a feeling that that judge's ruling is going to be overturned on technical or procedural grounds. And then the other case regards whether or not healthcare professionals can opt out of serving transgender people. And I think that's, an unfortunate case that's even being brought of, okay, these hospitals don't want to help people because it conflicts with their religious beliefs. But if they're accepting any kind of federal money, then they are sort of beholden to federal policy, which could include not discriminating against transgender people. And so, there's always the idea of reasonable accommodation, of if a doctor wants to opt out of a particular procedure, they can, so long as there's somebody else there to provide it. And in this particular instance, if it's an entire hospital, and this hospital is maybe the only one that's in the area, there are some actually very dangerous implications for transgender people if somebody refuses to provide them health care, in particular, say, in an emergency situation, or where they would be hard-pressed to find access to care somewhere else. All of which begs, if you're able to opt out of helping transgender people, that means that transgender people are now somehow a class. And nobody has made that legal argument yet, and so it remains to sort of be seen kind of how this shakes out. But really the bigger thing here is that now you have conservatives attacking transgender people in schools, you have them attacking transgender people in healthcare. And keep in mind that in, I think, only like 20 states, transgender people have non-discrimination employment protections because there is no Equality Act, there is no sort of overall protection of gender identity. Which means that if a trans person can't maintain their health, it's going to be hard for them to maintain their job. If they can't go to school, or they can't be treated with decency at school, because let's be honest, a trans woman is going to get bullied in a men's bathroom at high school, and maybe even in higher education, then they're not even going to have some credentials and skills to help them get jobs. And all of this ignores the fact that trans youth are disproportionately represented in homeless populations, as are LGBT youth in the youth homeless population in the United States, mostly because they're being rejected at home by their family. And so if you're rejected at school, if you're rejected by healthcare, if you're rejected at home, how are you supposed to get a job, particularly when you can be legally discriminated against there as well? Not to mention in housing situations, you can also be legally discriminated against in some cases. And so this is whether or not the conservatives are planning to attack trans people on all fronts. I don't know what their motives are, but that is essentially what they are doing right now, whether or not they intend to at all. And that is why it's incredibly important that we support organizations like Lambda Legal, the Transgender Law Center, and progressive political candidates who are going to appoint progressive judges to the courts who aren't going to make these kind of conservative rulings that attack and discriminate against transgender people. And so while Hillary Clinton may not be your first choice for president, she is by far and away the best choice that the trans community has right now. But you should also vote down ballot to make sure that your attorney general isn't a piece of shit like Ken Paxton here in Texas, that your governor isn't a piece of shit like Pat McCrory in North Carolina or Greg Abbott here in Texas, and that your lieutenant governor, like that schmuck Dan Patrick here in Texas, aren't moronic conservatives trying to appeal to an ever-shrinking evangelical base on the basis of discrimination. Like, where do you think transgender people have been going to the bathroom for the past, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? We've been using those right bathrooms, and now that somebody somewhere decided to put it into law that you can't discriminate against us, now suddenly everybody's playing all these political games and trying to scare people into voting, like the despicable ad that Pat McCrory ran using a sexual assault victim who was actually sexually assaulted by her fucking brother. She was assaulted by her brother, but she's being portrayed in the McCrory ad, who's very, pro HB2, as, this is what you're protecting women from when you keep trans people out of the bathroom. Except her brother wasn't trans. Her brother didn't assault her in a bathroom or a locker room. Did it at home. And that is actually what happens in most sexual assault cases. It's a family member or somebody who the person already knows. But you don't see a single one of these fucking assholes actually trying to address that issue whatsoever. No, they actually go pose for pictures with the Dugars. They go bring people like Mark Foley on in the back of their stage, and he's a molester. Like, they are doing everything completely wrong. They actually don't care about this stuff. And they're trying to use the courts now, and particularly this one shithead judge here in Texas, to try to force their way through. And ultimately, they're going to lose, but it's going to be an expensive fight. So I encourage you to donate what you can, if you can, to Lambda Legal, the Transgender Law Center, and political candidates in competitive states who can help turn the country a little bit more progressive, because God knows we need it.